one of the things that I always talk to women about is that you need to have a retirement plan so that you can sustain on your own if something were to happen, right? Yes, it's great to plan as a family, and we do that, but we want to make sure that at the end of the day, if your spouse passes away, that you have enough support.
Today, our guest on Talking Retirement is Tanya Taylor. Tanya moved from Jamaica to America at a young age. She then studied to get her CPA and MBA. After spending years on Wall Street, she has helped guide many professional women to better financial futures through her coaching programs and with proper financial planning. We talked to Tanya about the importance of financial planning, how financial planning differs for women, her experience of being unable to work temporarily due to disability, and how we can tackle poverty in America. You won't want to miss this episode. Let's dive in. I really want to dive into a little bit about you. You have such an awesome history about how you came from Jamaica to now, working with all these people in the finance sector. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are.
Okay, sure. So I came from Jamaica at 16, had $100, undocumented, and I was alone. And I had no idea where I was going to live when I initially came. However, as I came to America, my family found a friend who would allow me to stay there. And when you're living in Jamaica, especially in poverty, you hear a lot about people living in America and how it's almost like street paved with gold. I got here and it was the complete opposite. Most people were living paycheck to paycheck, and the job they have wasn't really a career. It was just a job that they were getting by. I saw this opportunity as a way for me to pull myself and my family out of poverty. And I knew that in order to do that, I had to go back to school. So I paid my way through school, graduated from junior college, and then went to Baruch and got my CPA and bachelor's degree. But along the way, one of the things that I did was that I really wanted to learn about personal finance, and I started to teach myself. I would consume everything I could about personal finance because I just wanted to build wealth. That was just the bottom line. And fast forward 25, I'm graduating from college. I had already purchased my first home and met up with a couple colleagues and say, hey, we're not going to get rich by just working. So let's start learning how to invest. So I transitioned from just learning about budgeting, credit, debt, to now here we are investing. We created a stock market investment club, and I ran it for 6 years. So now we were investors. We were also owning properties. And one of the things I wanted to do was to give back. So I started to volunteer in community, in schools, teaching people personal finance as well. And so that's where my whole personal finance journey was born. I really wanted people to also pull themselves out of poverty as well. So by giving them that knowledge, it was a way for them to learn how to do that.
Yeah, it's super inspiring that you started at such humble beginnings and were able to, fully use the finance system in America to protect yourself and help others. What has it meant to you to see people come out of poverty like you did and, come to a place like you are now where they're more self-sufficient, they're less worried about the future and everything?
So I will answer that in two parts. I think that a lot of times we give people the knowledge or the information, but they don't take advantage of it, right? They hear it, but they don't use it. And so they remain stuck. And then you have other individuals who hear it and they're like, hey, I can do this. And so they'll take advantage of it and really pull themselves out of their financial situation. And I have this one client that I like to use a lot because when she came to me, she had zero financial knowledge. She even said to me, I don't think I could learn this. I think it's too complicated. But her husband had a medical emergency and she did not know if he was going to survive. And that scared her so much that she was like, I have to learn. And for that particular client, when she came in, she had high credit card debt. Her credit was good, but this high debt, no emergency fund, always taking vacation on her credit card. By the time she went through my program, which is a 90-day program, she had figured out how to pay off all her debt, and she ended up paying it off in 7 months. She had an emergency fund. Her first budget that she had put together, um, not her first budget, her first vacation that she was taking was without credit card debt. Never had a pay increase. On top of that, I think that it gave her such confidence that there was a job that they were offering at her workplace, and she said she was not qualified. I helped her put her resume together, helped her prepare for the interview. She got the job. She got a 30% salary increase. And since then, she's had a total of 3 promotions. So she continues to tell me that she will become my first millionaire client.
Great success story. And I know what you mean. I actually wanted to talk to you about this. I feel like a lot of times in our space, we want to give people insurance that they need, be it life insurance, cancer insurance, long-term care insurance, and they really, we really don't do it until we absolutely need it. And in that point, it can be too late in many cases. How do you help people approach that mental hurdle of facing these potentially very traumatic situations and saying this might not happen for 10 or 20 years, but the time to prep is now?
A very interesting question. So, I've always been a big proponent of insurance for various reasons. When I was 21, I got my first insurance policy, and that was because I was the only one living in America, and I was thinking, what if I die? How would my parents get my body? It was just very simple, naive thinking. But through that process, I started to learn more about life insurance, right? And I realized that it's a great way to transfer wealth. So that's one of the first things I talk to my clients about when it comes to life insurance. Just many of us can't work and leave something for our children, but in a way of building generation wealth, that's one way. But life happens. And what if you happen to pass away, you leave young children? So I talk to them about making sure that they could cover their income, cover their lifestyle if one of them were to pass away. So that's just life insurance. The second piece that I like to talk to them about is long term disability. And now that I've gone through the process of having to use my long term disability, it's so much more of a conversation with people because I realize, well, I've always known the importance of it, right? But when it really hits you and you're going through it, you realize that there's so much more that you could talk about with it because I've always told my clients that having long term disability just through their job might not be sufficient. They may need to get a supplemental policy. When I became disabled 3 years ago, I had a policy through my job, but I also had a policy on my own, a supplemental policy. And every day I say I'm so grateful that I had both because just that one policy alone was not sufficient. It was 60% of my income. So that supplemental policy was able to assist me in being able to live similar lifestyle to I was living before because it was close to my total income. And now I won't just tell my clients an abstract, right? Now I could tell them practical, concrete example of how it works and what happened in my situation. And I did a TED talk on this recently where I really talked to people about why this is so important. One of the questions that I've gotten a lot is whether or not I sell insurance. And I've never sold insurance before. I've worked in the insurance industry on the corporate side, but I feel so strongly about insurance that it's something that I've always encouraged people to get.
One of the exciting things about talking to you, Tanya, is you told me before we started recording that most of your clients are women. And as someone who deals primarily in Medicare and deals primarily with women in their 60s, 70s, something you touched on is women usually live longer. They're usually the caretakers. They usually need more financial security, but due to different factors, they usually are the least prepared. So how do you create a financial plan, a retirement plan, a wealth building plan for a woman? And how do you get them to, really put their foot down and actually start doing it?
Great question. Thank you. I think the biggest thing is just sharing some of those facts with these women, just so that they're aware. Like, you will most likely outlive your husband. In addition to that, a lot of women are heading up single household as well. So we have to be realistic about that too. And also, later in life, you're finding that a lot of women are also ending up in divorce situations. So one of the things that I always talk to women about is that you need to have a retirement plan so that you can sustain on your own if something were to happen, right? So yes, it's great to plan as a family, and we do that, but we want to make sure that at the end of the day, if your spouse passes away, that you have enough support. And some of that is through life insurance as well, right? So you're planning, you're putting together a roadmap. When my client comes to me, we usually put together what we call their wealth roadmap, and we're putting all the components together. But we're also taking a step back and saying, okay, what if one spouse passes away? What do we want to make sure that we have within this, so that you alone could be able to at least live the lifestyle that you were living while your spouse is gone? And so whether it's having that extra life insurance policy, making sure that you either have enough to pay your house off, if that's the case, or if you have a home where you could rent a part of it, maybe that's another option that you should consider. So it's not always very much like, okay, you need to have all this in retirement, because most people, unfortunately, will not have all of this in retirement. So we look at other pieces that's going to make sure that the house is solid. And then we're going to say, okay, how do we start putting these pieces together? You have a house. What is the mortgage? Are you going to be able to pay off the mortgage? If you're not, how are you going to pay the mortgage if your spouse is gone? Does your spouse have insurance? Is your spouse insurable? Let's get some insurance there so that we can have that. And we have those discussions too about whole life in term, because there's all these conversations about, is this one better? Is this one not better? And I feel like each of them serve their purpose. And so we have to go through and dig deep and say, okay, which one serves this? What purpose does this one serve? And then go out and see also affordability, because we have to be realistic too. I never want my client to have an insurance policy that's not going to be sustainable. So we look at all these different components, and then we make a determination of how realistic it is that you can maybe buy additional insurance, maybe have long-term care. That's one of those things that's almost out of reach right now, long-term care. So if there's no long-term care, how are you going to, if you become ill, if you're alone, what is that going to look like? How are you going to pay for that? So every client is going to be different, because obviously each of their assets are going to be different, but we're kind of look at a whole plate or a whole menu of things, and then decide which pieces are we picking out for this particular client based on their circumstance. But I think the key takeaway is we want to make sure that if your spouse is not around, that you'll be able to live the lifestyle that you're accustomed to.
Yeah, it's a good way to look at it. Do you find your own experiences of, coming from humble beginnings to being a strong, financially secure woman are what made you want to get into this career space? Did you want to give what you have to other women, basically?
100%. I was corporate. So I worked in corporate for 24 years, right? Like banking, insurance, accounting. That's what I did in corporate. But again, because of where I came from and because of what I see around, when I was thinking, okay, what do I want to do when I leave corporate? What is something that I would do that if someone doesn't pay me, I would do it? And this was it. And when I look at women struggling and realize that if I were to impart a certain knowledge on them, a lot of it is fear, right? Like, I don't know this is complicated. If I could break it down to you and show you that it's not as complex as you think, and when you get into it and you do this, you can feel secure. It was a no-brainer for me that this is what I want to do, and this is something that I could do. People talk about retirement, and retirement looks very different for different people, right? When I think about what I'm doing now, like, retirement is not something that I'm like, okay, at 65, I'm going to be done, or at 59, I'm going to be done. My retirement plan was created to help me to have the option to say, if I don't want to work for 3 months, I don't have to work for 3 months. But because I love what I do so much, I think I'll be doing this for the rest of my life, because so many women need this. And there's a huge gap just in general for men and women. But when it comes to women especially, there's this gap that we need to fill.
Do you find that women in general have a little more trepidation towards learning these things? I know you mentioned there's a fear to it. What do you think is the reason for that? Why do you think so many women don't want to think about finances or think about the future?
I think some of it is mindset. A lot of it is the way we grew up. Also, if you think about just not very long ago, women couldn't even own a credit card. The man was always the main caretaker of the home. And a lot of things that we grow up seeing, we continue to live it. And so if we saw our parents where the husband was the caretaker, even though we have become these independent women who have a career, we still think about finances in a very negative way for many reasons. Could be the stories we heard about money is the root of all evil, which is just crazy nonsense. But also the men take care of the money, so we don't need to do it. We could sit and relax. And I think that we have to get that mindset out of the way and start saying, you need to understand your finances. And even if the man continues to pay all the bills, you still need to understand it, because if something were to happen, and there are a myriad of things that could happen, you don't want to be left not knowing what's happening, not having anything for yourself. So this mindset shift that we have to make is to say both women and men need to know about their finances. And women, we can invest. Like, that's not a thing that's just for men. It's something that we can all do. And here is how you can do it. And that's something that I say a lot because I want to normalize it. And I think even starting with younger girls, boys too, but younger girls, and saying, hey, understand money, understand how money works. I tell my daughters, I have two girls, 19 and 17, and I tell them, you're in a STEM field, but still take a finance class, some kind of money class, so that you understand certain basic things just about how money works and just about how you can use money as a tool and not fear it.
I think fear is such an important emotion when we talk about these things, because there's such a fear over facing these conversations and facing your reality. But I think the scarier thing is not having the conversation and something going wrong. How do you incorporate the emotional component into all this to get it past the spreadsheet, get it past numbers, and say, this is, your life. It isn't so much just, compound interest and all those.
Yeah, so interesting, because the very first thing that I do when someone comes into my program is mindset. And oftentimes clients will tell me, like, maybe a month later, sometimes even weeks later, like, I came into this class to learn about money. So when you start with this mindset, I'm like, oh my God, this is not what I want to learn, but this is the best thing that I could have done. Because once I do this, and one of the things that they have to do in this mindset portion of my program is that they need to set goals. What are your short-term goals? What are your medium-term goals? And what are your long-term goals? And then how are you going to get each of these accomplished? And I think once they realize that, okay, if these are my goals, so now I need to align what I'm doing with my goals. And that's going to include aligning my spending with my goals too. And so suddenly you start to see this shift that happens almost naturally without them having to feel this fear, like, oh my God, like, I can't do this, because I've taken them down this journey of, hey, if you do this and you're lining these things up, it's naturally going to happen. And I think one of the things that I've noticed, that it takes away a lot of the fear, but it does something even more. It gives them this drive to push forward, to say, oh, I can do this. It's not so scary. And here is why I'm doing this, because these are my ultimate goals. Like that one client I mentioned who said, I want to be your first millionaire client. And she's coming from literally having zero savings. But now every time she does something, she's lining it up with this goal to become a millionaire. And I think once they make that shift, and they can, even if they fall off the wagon, if they continue to recommit, then they're going to see a significant difference in just how they operate overall.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I think once you turn it from you're coming from a position of disadvantage to a position of potential growth and potential power, I think it becomes a much more empowering conversation. I think the average finances, and you would probably have the actual numbers, we're looking at most people can't afford a $500 emergency. I think a lot of people are very underwater. They're struggling to get to a point where they can even think about savings. What do you think are some things we could do on like our own small level, and maybe even we'll break this into two parts of a question. What do you think people can do as an individual to help, get out of that hole? And what are some more macro level things we should be doing at maybe like a state or country level to help address these problems?
Sure. So on a micro level, I really believe that if we start opening up our credit card bill, something as basic as that, a lot of people are so fearful of what they're going to see that they're not opening up their credit card bill. They're paying the minimum. They're not understanding that if they pay the minimum, it's going to take them X years. And it's on the credit card bill. So maybe if they opened it up and took a look at it, it would be an awakening for them. So they can start with that. I think that also credit is a big thing for a lot of people too. If they don't have good credit, then they're going to be paying these high interest rates. They can't get certain things. Like if you're applying for a phone, you have to put a down payment, insurance, your insurance rate might be higher. Repairing your credit and having a budget. We hear this a lot, and sometimes people make it seem like it's like a cliche now, like, oh, budget. But we really need to know what we have coming in and what we're spending. And when we know that, we could figure out, are we overspending? And if we are, what are we going to cut out? And I always tell people, don't cut out the things that you love. You might have to modify it a bit, but look at the things that why are you buying 50 pairs of shoes? Do you really need them? Maybe you just need 10. Okay. Yeah. So you buy those 10 pairs, maybe you don't need 10. So just looking at things like that are some of the things that's going to shift, and realizing how important it is to have some savings set aside. It comes back again to what I said before about setting the goals and being able to align with the goals. So I think that from a micro level, those are just some of the basic things that we could do. I call it the wild trifecta: budget, credit, and debt. And all layering underneath that, or on top of it, if you want to put it that way, is a whole mindset shift. Now, from a macroeconomic level, first of all, student loan debt is going to just wipe people out. So many young people just cannot afford to purchase a house anymore, or so many older people who have mortgaged their house, mortgaged their retirement, cannot afford to retire anymore because they're unable to pay the student loan debt off and be able to pull money out for retirement. So that's one of the things that's really critical, that we have to start looking at the student loan debt and come to some kind of consensus about how we can make this better for our young people and for our older people as well. I also think that the 401k plan is great, the Roth IRA is great, but if there's no education around it, a lot of people don't know, like, okay, if I'm only putting 2%, or if my job is offering me 6% and I'm not even putting the match into that, then I'm literally leaving money on the table. So I think, like, from a macro level as well, I know that, I think it was 2022 when they passed this law about, just even forcing companies to start almost forcing people to save, even though it's not a force, there's some opt-out option. But since pension is no longer a thing, I think there has to be some sort of savings that's built in as well, so that people could start saving for retirement. They need to revisit Social Security. There's all this political discussion about Social Security and what that looks like. First of all, $1,300 a month cannot sustain anyone in most states, no matter how rural, no matter how cheap we want to say. $1,300 is not something that's sustainable. So what should Social Security look like? And then the housing crisis is another big thing. One of the things that's happening a lot is that private equity firms are buying up single family homes. That should be illegal. Like, I just get really frustrated when I hear about all these companies that keep buying up real estate. So before, if you can't live in New York, like me, I live in New York, and rent is just so crazy that I don't know how anyone affords to live here and pay rent. But in the past, you'd be able to say, let me move to Atlanta or let me move to Florida because it's a little cheaper, and maybe they pay not as low as maybe some other states. Now it doesn't matter. You could move to Florida, you're looking for a 1 bedroom and you're paying this exorbitant amount of rent. And part of that is because now if a smaller group of people own these houses, so then it pushes out the average person who would want to buy a house. That's one. But two, the price of the house is so high that it's unaffordable to the average person. And so you can't own a home, so you have no equity. You're not putting money in your retirement because you're uneducated about the whole process, and there's no mandatory requirement. Social Security is really poverty level. So you sort of find that in America, we're becoming just really poor. We talk a lot about the third world, but you think if no one can afford anything here anymore, and we're in massive amount of debt, and these credit card companies could charge whatever rate they choose to charge, then there is like, where is the balance? There is no balance. And so from a macro level, there's a lot that also needs to be done. Not sure how we're going to start doing that, but those are just a fraction of the things that I could think about off the top of my head.
Since we're more focused on seniors, I think it'd be good for us to talk about people who are, and it might be a difficult conversation, but say you're close to retirement, like how you kind of plan once you're already in your 60s or 70s, if you haven't. Is that something you could shed some light on? I know it's probably tough.
It's tough because there are things, because I actually had a client who was in her 60s and I was able to help her to do some things. So I could probably use her as an example, but yeah, it's hard when you're starting with nothing. So this client, she's a nurse and she was still working. She was actually past 65, healthy, vibrant, and she planned to continue working for at least another 5, she said at least 5 to 8 years. She didn't really have much saved for retirement. She had no emergency fund. But she did have some money that she was using to try to buy a property because her rent had gotten to be too high. So what she ended up doing, instead of buying a 1-bedroom house, she bought a 2-bedroom place, and she was able to rent a part of it. And so that was going to help her to pay her mortgage instead of her having to use all of her income, to a huge chunk of her income. She was able to get a good portion of it that she was able to collect in rental income. So that was one of the first strategies that we implemented. She also had an annuity, I must say. And so, she thought about, okay, it was a very small annuity, so she was going to be using some of that as well. But some of the things that we talked about too is, okay, if she's going to work for another 5 to 7 years, she doesn't need to start looking at Social Security. She could continue to have her Social Security grow until the point where she needs to start taking it out, then she started taking it out. So what we decided to do, and again, one of the things that she came in saying is like, first of all, she wanted to start trading because she felt like she could make a lot of money in trading, and I had to talk her down from that, because as much as you could make in trading, the chances of you losing is much higher than the chances of you winning. And so we had to go through that whole conversation. It was a very difficult conversation with her because this idea that she was so far behind was really stressing her out. So instead we said to her, there are funds that are out there that we can see their track record. They've done pretty well. Even if we just take the S&P index, we're going to put some money in cash because you're getting older and you could become ill. Let's be real, right? So we're going to take some of the money, we're going to put it in cash. And now fortunately we can get interest on the cash, right? And then we're going to take some of this money and we're going to put them in safer investments. We're not going to trade it because it's too risky and we don't want you losing more money. So we were able to open up an account, and she was able to start investing in not just the S&P, but in a couple other funds as well. And we kind of mapped out what that may look like over the next 8 years. And when we include the Social Security as well. And, she also talked about starting some kind of business because she has all this experience. So we never got to the point where she started the business. But that was another thing that she was looking into doing so that she could generate additional income as well. And with all of those pieces, one of the key things that we talked about too was, how much do you think that you'll need in retirement? How do we get to that number? And so we, came up with these different strategies of how she would get to that number and how she could continue to live a relatively good lifestyle now without sacrificing everything that she wants to do. Because at this age, you want to enjoy life as well. So we tried to find that balance in order for her to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's a great, point that you want to enjoy life. You don't want to just pinch every penny and store it in an account. Something that really resonated with me is you talked about how she really wanted to trade and make up money. And, as a financial professional, it's not something I'm an insurance professional, but every book I've ever read has just been like, investing's boring. It's just letting your money sit in like a mutual fund. But I do think we live in such a crazy social media heavy world. There's all these finance influencers that want to promise you the moon, whether it's crypto, whether it's day trading. Do people come to you ready to make those drastic moves? And then if they do you have to kind of talk them off the ledge and say, this is what you actually do?
Yes, all the time. All the time, because especially there was actually this scam with FX. And I had a client come into my program and she told me she was a part of this. I hadn't known about it before she came in. I sat down and I researched it. But when she told me about it, I automatically said, that's a scam. I worked at Goldman Sachs with traders in the FX, foreign exchange. For those who don't know what FX is, in foreign exchange, they had huge losses and huge gains, but they were hedging these things. You have firm-wide hedge so that even if you have losses in foreign exchange, you may have gains on the other side that balances it out. This is how these large corporations do this. So when she told me that they were getting a return every single month, I said to her, every single week, actually, I said, this is a pyramid scheme. Here's what I'm going to recommend to you. Take your money out. But if you don't want to take all your money out, take at least the capital that you put in. That way, if something goes awry, you have no losses. Whatever losses you have is the losses from the money that you were getting. Turns out the government shut them down, and she never listened, unfortunately. So she lost a lot of money that she had put in. And she told me about people who had sold their houses or mortgaged their houses to put in this. So I can't imagine how much losses there was. And then I have other people who come in and say, hey, I want to trade. I hear that you can make a lot of money. I see all these people, they're making a lot of money. And again, I have to go through the whole talking them down, explaining to them that, yeah, you can make money in trading, but the majority of traders lose money. So yeah, you might end up being like that 10% or 5% that make money, but do you really want to take that risk? We talk a lot about being risk averse, or, what's your risk tolerance? And so I'll have them do an exercise to determine what their risk tolerance is. And I will say to them, sort of something like this. Okay, so let's say, and even if you have a high risk tolerance, let's say you want to get to here for retirement. How do we want to break up these buckets? So you can have like mutual funds, bonds, exchange traded funds, which are a little safer. You could have stocks here. And then maybe you could take, what percent of money are you willing to lose? Because that's the amount that you should use to trade. That's the amount that you should put in crypto, in any other risky type product. And so we go through like this pyramid, and I'm like, okay, what percent? Most people don't want to lose anything. So a lot of times they end up like not trading and not putting anything in crypto because they're like, well, I don't really want to lose anything. But if there's someone that really says, you know what, I'm willing to take the risk, then we'll say, okay, what's the max that you'll put in? And I'm honest with them. Like I've said to them, I own crypto, right? But when I put that money in, I decided that that is money that I'm willing to lose. So, and it was a very, very tiny, it wasn't even 1% off my portfolio. But I said, okay, the crypto's out there, I'm going to invest in it. And so I'm also very open with them about what I do. But I said, even though I have all these things in place, And even though I have probably am more knowledgeable about you in many of these things, there are certain risks that I'm not willing to take. But if I take the risk, I know that it's possible I could lose all my money. And I have to be okay with that before I make that decision.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I've actually had a couple friends who have been pretty successful with crypto, but when I talk to them about it, they're like, "Oh, it's gambling." Like
Yeah,
there's
it
no
is.
veneer, there's no, oh, this is changing the finance sector. They're like, no, I made a educated guess, I gambled and it worked out, and
Yep.
I also had some gambles that didn't work out. So it's
Yeah.
like, are you willing to just, like you said, accept that risk that it's probably going to be gone, but the rewards could
Yes.
be high?
Correct. Yes. Which is why I never say absolutely not, but we go through the process of deciding, are you willing to take that risk?
Do you find that there's any like common scams people come to you with? I don't, maybe scam's a strong word, but do you have any, things to look out for?
Well, that foreign exchange was one of the big scam. It was, especially in the Black community, when I heard about how many people were involved in that, it was scary for me because I just felt like this is a population where we're already so stressed in terms of resources and lack of knowledge. So that's it. There's another one which is it's called a susu, like in my community again, and I think there are other. I don't think it's just the Black community or the West Indian or African community. I think during COVID, there was this thing called a susu where the way that it works is sort of like everybody's like a community investment. You'd put all the money in, and then one person would take all the get what we call a hand each week. So if there are 20 of us, we each put, for argument's sake, $100. So we end up with $2,000 every week, right? So let's say you, I, and 18 other people. I decided that I'm going to be the first person to get. So at the end of the first week, after everyone puts their money in, I'll get the 2,000. Then the next week, you get the 2,000. And this is something that has happened for generations. This is how we've been able to save. But then during COVID, it became almost like a pyramid scheme, and now it's become, even now it continues to be one of those things where they're turning into a business, but there's a scam around it where the people who are putting their money in, they're not getting the money out like it normally should work. So that was another one. I'm trying to think what's another scam. Trading again. I've had some clients come to me who talked about they could make $1,000 a day trading, and it's just not mathematically possible. And so, just kind of talking to them about, yeah, you probably shouldn't do that. I can't think of any more off the top of my head, but like those are the three biggest ones that I could think of.
Yeah, no, I feel like every time I turn on YouTube and I watch a lot of business YouTubers, I feel like I get a lot of ads that are like, I have a spreadsheet for foreign exchange, and for just $10, you can make $500 a day. And you're like, no, I'm sorry, man.
Yeah, it's not happening. It's
Yeah,
not.
it's tough. Well, Tanya, this is all super insightful. Not only fighting the mental hurdles you need to become financially successful, but the specific ways to do it, and a lot of the specific ways that you help women tackle that specifically. So, you're a treasure trove of knowledge. What kind of services? What kind of services do you offer people, and where can people find you if they'd like to work with you in the future?
So I have a 90-day coaching program where I help women to achieve financial independence. I really teach them how to build wealth so that they could feel confident and be able to retire worry-free. It's a 90-day program. People can reach me at growyourwealth10x.com, or they can reach me on LinkedIn. It's Tanya Taylor, CPA, MBA, or on Instagram at growyourwealth10x. So those are like the three main places that I am, and people can find me there and could just schedule a call. We have a talk, see if we would be a good fit to work together, and then I can help them to really achieve their financial goals.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been an honor to have you on the podcast. I will link her TED Talk below. Everyone should watch it. It's really fascinating to talk about how you had this random disability pop up, and luckily, you're able to overcome it, but just the reality that struck when that hit. And it's pretty fascinating to watch. So again, Tanya, thank you so much for your time, and we will be talking in the future.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Ken.